Shavua Tov. Wonderful to see you. Hope we're doing well. Wow, up to our 5th class. Just realizing that it's almost the 6th class. It's our last one. I'm gonna miss you. I really am. This has been awesome. May it continue. Who knows? Okay. I hope you had wonderful Shabbatot and your week's off to a good start. Okay. Coming into our 5th class, we're focusing now on Yisrael. Israel, people Israel, each of us in our unique role. We'll take a second to review and open up the practice. Begin with the Shema, opening to vulnerable intimacy and connection with God, hearing Hashem, not just seeing from afar, but connecting from within. We move to Echad and try to understand that the opposite of Echad is Acher, other, and that Hashem, Yud-Ke Vav-Ke, is filling all of existence, including myself. In class 3, Hashem Elokeinu, we touched upon the 2 aspects of God. God as oneness, beyond any differentiation, separation, fully loving kindness, without any gvul, without any limit. And Elokeinu, the God of limit, who we experience both as good, but also as bad, as tragedy, as pain, and trying to incorporate this aspect into the one. We then asked, well, why do we need the second Hashem? Okay, once you said that Hashem Elokeinu, that the aspect of loving kindness beyond all boundary and the aspect of boundary and limitation are indeed one, well, then why do you need the second Hashem? And we proposed that really Hashem as well goes through a process, that we potentially facilitate this process, the Shem Yichud Kutche Brichu, that all of our actions are for the sake of the unification of. And when we unify Hashem in this world, Hashem actually is able to become manifest and embodied, just as we saw when we're seeing in the parashiyot of these weeks in the Mishkan, in the Holy Tabernacle, that God finds a resting place within both the tabernacle itself, but also betocham, within the people. So seemingly, we're done, our class. It seems to be the theme of every class. We've done all the work. There's no need for any more. But indeed, Yisrael comes to add an additional deep aspect and layer of our process. So before we get there, let's just open into our bodies, open into presence. I invite you to find a comfortable seat. You can bring your feet flat to the ground. Imagine that there's a string pulling your head up to the sky. Straightening the back. Breathing in through the nose. And out through the mouth. As we begin with the shin, with the sh. We're reminded that this quieting is a quieting that includes, that sees the voices of the children, the annoyances in our lives, not as annoyances, but as part of the one. And that, we feel God's kiss. Also in our hard parts, the pieces of ourselves that annoy us, finding Hashem's kiss within there. We remember our second class, God's filling all the world. We breathe out as God breathed in to all existence, filling Hashem within all. And I want to invite us to add here a holding of our breath, opening to receive God's thank you. After we've brought our attention, our awareness to pause and receive from God a thank you. Thank you for being you. Thank you for participating in this process, for bringing me embodiment in this world. So we begin again from the beginning, in through our nose. Pause. Thank you. One more. Pause. Welcome back. When you're ready, you can return. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, Hashem is our God. Hashem is one. Now I'd like to begin with a story. A story of a young man who went out searching for meaning. He was searching for community and searching for connection. And he found a native tribe. And this is a story that I heard, not firsthand, but second. Found a native tribe in the Midwest of the United States. I think it was in Arizona. And he found deep connection with their culture and with their people, with their community. And he stayed there for quite a while. And the spiritual chief of the tribe would have conversations one-on-one with many of the students, many of his community members. And one day he asked the young man to come out for a walk. And they go for a walk and they're walking in silence, as was normal. And eventually the chief said to the young man, "What is your name?" "What is your name?" He's been there for months. You know my name, it's Jay, let's say. No, what is your name? Jay, man. Jay. What is your name? Jay, upon the third time, just breaks down crying. tears are flowing, he doesn't even know. The chief taps him on the back and, Jay, what is your name? He said, my name is Shlomo ben David, a name that he hadn't called himself. He didn't even know that he remembered back from his bar mitzvah when he was called up to the Torah. He barely had it in him, but somehow it was in there. I have a name. I have a name among my people. A sense of belonging, overwhelming sense of true home. This story I heard only secondhand, as I said, so can't tell you exactly who and how and what happened. But what is a name? Shema Yisrael. Hear, O Israel. Israel, a name. Now, we'll see a source soon that asks, if we're proclaiming God's oneness, and it's true, let's say, everything we've said so far, that the oneness is within me, and Hashem Elokeinu, loving kindness, as well as boundary. The process of God's becoming embodied. What a beautiful proclamation, but that's all we need to say. Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. If we want the Shema, tap into the intimacy, but Yisrael, I know who I am. I know who I am. Why do I need to remind myself? If I'm proclaiming a statement of belief in God, and if I'm doing a practice of unifying, why do I need this aspect? So let's first tap into a little bit the name of Yisrael. The name of Yisrael is something that many of us are familiar with. The story of Israel, of Israel. Now, Israel is not originally the name of our people, but is the name of one of our ancestors, Jacob. Jacob begins with the name Yaakov. And in conversation with an angel, after he's struggled with him, fought with him, wrestled with him, before he's going to see his brother Esav, after years and years of distance, trepidation, fear are coming through Jacob. And in conversation, the angel says, your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel. We have striven with Elohim and with humans and have prevailed. You have striven with Elohim. Now ignore the Hashem there, because this was the angel who was speaking. You have striven with Elohim and with humans and have prevailed. Now, we're familiar with the term Elohim. It's not that you have striven with Yud Ke Vav Ke, right? It's not that you have struggled and wrestled with Hashem, who is the one beyond all distinction and differentiation, but you have striven and struggled with Elohim. We remember who Elohim is. Elohim is the God of boundary, of distinction. The experienced aspect of God who may do what we imagine and what we expect and what we want, but may do otherwise. Striving, struggling. Jacob is struggling with this aspect of God. And therefore, he receives the name Yisrael. Sar El, you have struggled. Sarita, you have wrestled and struggled with God, with Elohim, and with man. What's interesting is the psukim go on, and I don't know if we would have noticed this, and I never noticed this before looking at this more in depth, following our first few classes. Jacob says to the angel, what's your name? What do you ask my name for? And he blesses him. And then Jacob has a beautiful inspiration to name the place in which he's striven with God. And he says, Vayikra Yaakov Shem Makom Pni El, Ki Ra'ita Elohim Panim El Panim. Pnei El, the faces of God, the face of God. I'm calling this place the face of God because I have seen God face to face, Elohim face to face, and I was saved. Now, of course, we, having been in this class for the past 4 sessions, are immediately taken back to Dvarim, to our first class, right? In which we saw that the original request of the 10 Commandments was what? That the original request of Shema, right? We're not reading this word by word because we saw this already, but the original request of Shema, and Moses called all Israel and said to them, Hear, O Israel, hear, O Israel. And what does this hearing come from? It comes from an interaction of face to face, not with our forefathers did Hashem make this covenant, but with us. We, all of us whom are here alive today. Face to face, Hashem spoke to you at the mountain out of the midst of the fire. What is the connection between experiencing God face to face and struggling with God? Struggling with Elohim, wrestling with God. That in order to stand face to face with God, it seems that I need the courage to struggle and wrestle with God as Jacob did, as he's waiting for Esau. Now, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, he says that there are a number of interpretations of this idea of wrestling that Jacob engaged in. The story of Jacob's wrestling match with an unnamed adversary alone at night is surely one of the most enigmatic in the entire Torah. With whom was Jacob wrestling? The text itself calls him a man. According to the prophet Hosea, it was an angel. For the sages, it was the guardian angel of Esav. So we have many different interpretations. And I was reminded to give a summary of the course before I jump in. I apologize, I've forgotten. So we'll be seeing 3 primary sources, 3 primary branches in this class. The first is this idea of Yisrael, the name of Israel, as it's given to Jacob, who struggles with God. The second is the becoming of a nation that happens through the process of going down to Egypt. Why is Egypt such an essential process for our becoming this nation, becoming the nation of Israel, the children of Israel? And the third is Ivri, the term Ivri that is used to refer to Abraham Ivri, and the significance of otherness in the Jewish people and our service of God. Okay, with that, we come back to Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs says we have a number of interpretations, but Jacob himself had no doubt. It was God. He called the place of encounter Peniel, as we just read, because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared. The adversary himself implies as much when he gives Jacob the name Israel, because you have struggled with God and with man and have overcome. The passage resists easy interpretation, yet it holds the key to understanding Jewish identity. It is not we, the readers, who give it this significance, but the Torah itself. For it was then, at the dawn, as the dawn was about to break, that Jacob acquired the name that his descendants would bear throughout eternity. The people of the covenant are not the children of Abraham or Isaac, but the children of Israel. So not only is Rabbi Sachs confirming that this wrestling was with God himself, as is the simple understanding of the text, but he is also directing us to respond to the question, why? What is its significance? Showing us that it indeed does have great significance for our understanding of Jewish identity. So let's dive a little bit further in. We're going to do our chavruta a little bit early this class. I think it'd be fun to switch it up. And it'll allow us to dive into our second question. What does it mean to struggle with Elohim? How does this enable us to meet Hashem face to face? And its connection with our descent into Egypt. You'll see in Brit Bein HaBetarim, the covenant between the parts, or the covenant by the pieces, something of that. It's interpreted in 2 ways. in which God promises Abraham that he will come into Israel, that his descendants will come into Israel, that they will receive the land. And in doing so and promising, Abraham asks questions, and God has a very, very peculiar response. You'll see his response, and we'll go both through this source as well as through the following two, until the next question of why is Egypt so pivotal to our becoming a nation. And we're still dealing with the question that we've raised with Jacob. What is the significance of struggling with God? What's the significance of struggle? Egypt is the epitome of struggle, of enslavement, of being pushed to an extreme, having to wrestle with my reality and wrestle with the reality that God has given me and try to ask why. This will be an important foundation for understanding our role as a people in unifying God's name. Okay, so we're going to take the opportunity to jump into Chavruta, and we'll have a conversation when we come back, both opening the door for questions on what I've just said and also in the next stage. Are there any questions thus far?
Yes, please. It's Tiferet. I'm not entirely sure what the question is that you'd like us to discuss.
Great. So our question is primarily focused on the coming texts. We don't need to, at this point, connect the coming texts with what we previously discussed, with what I've just said. Our question right now, the focus is just, why is Egypt an essential element to our becoming a nation? What role does our descent down to Egypt play in our becoming a nation? And that's question number one. That's all we really need to focus on right now. If we want, the second layer of the question is, and what's the connection in this with struggling with God, with struggling with the reality that God has given me, struggling with the challenges that God has given me? Okay. Great.
What is the text? Yeah. What is the text that we're studying?
Michal, can you just give me the thank you so much. So the text that we're studying here is Brit Ben Abitarim, the covenant between Abraham and God and Abraham, which is here under Chavruta. I just sent you the updated version a few minutes ago. I apologize. I actually was meant to send out at 2 p.m., but I never clicked send. In any case, in Chavruta, we'll be doing these three texts: Bereshit, Tedvav, Genesis 15, as well as the next two texts, which are Exodus 22, First Commandment, and the Midrash. So these three texts that are written under Chavruta. Wonderful. So
I'm sorry. This is still completely unclear to me.
Okay.
Can I also make a suggestion?
Yeah, please, Susan.
You'd be given three different portions, of which you just sent now two of them, so we haven't had an opportunity to read it, is right. A little bit beyond many of us, I think, especially me. I'm wondering if perhaps we could maybe read them aloud together, and then, because then you end up cutting us off in the Chavruta after 3
right.
seconds. How can we possibly read portions that we are just receiving now and be able to discuss them with any kind of intelligence?
Fair
or
enough,
feeling?
Susan, I totally hear you. So I apologize for not saying this earlier. And again, that was my mistake. So I'm happy to skip the Chavruta portion today. No problem at all. Great.
Nadav?
Yeah, please, Dana.
Could we pause and do the Chavruta and just talk for a few minutes in Chavruta with what does it mean to wrestle, strive, struggle with Elohim? How does this enable us to meet Hashem face to face? That seems like a pretty specific
So you know
thing
what?
that
You know
actually
what we'll
talk
do,
about.
Daniel? I think we will. Let's do these next sources,
Okay,
and then we'll have an opportunity just to discuss. And that's a good idea. So we still have an opportunity for discussion in pair.
whatever you want to do.
That's
fine.
great. That's great. And then it can also be an opportunity to go over the text that we've already seen. Okay, great. Great. Okay, thank you so much for the feedback in all directions. I appreciate it. Okay. Okay, so we touched upon Israel. We touched upon Israel as struggling with God, and we're trying to understand, what does that mean to struggle with God? How is that a part of our people? Why is that an important part of who we are? And trying to answer this question, we're going to check out an essential aspect of our becoming a nation, which was our descent into Egypt. So let's look into Bereshit Tet Vav, Genesis 15. We have a discussion, a conversation between God and Abraham. Okay. Sometime later, the word of Hashem came to Abraham in a vision. He said, "Fear not, Abraham. I am a shield to you. Your reward should be very great." Notice God says, "Fear not. There's nothing to fear. I will be there for you." But Abraham said, "Oh Hashem, God, what can you give me, seeing that I shall die childless?" This is prior to Abraham having any children. What promise is you will be very great if he has no children to follow after him? Abraham said further, "Since you have granted me no offspring, my steward will be my heir." The word of Hashem came to him in reply, "That one shall not be your heir. None but your very own issue should be your heir." Now we're speaking about Ishmael, right? Abraham has Yitzchak and Ishmael, but he's yet to have Isaac. He only has Ishmael. And Abraham says, "You know what? Fine. At least Ishmael will follow me." But God says, "No, it will not be the case. Isaac, another child, you don't yet know his name, will be your heir." He took him outside and said, God took Abraham, "Look toward the heaven and count the stars. If you are able to count them, are you able to count them?" And he added, "So shall your offspring be. Just as you're not able to count the stars, so too you will not be able to count your offspring. There will be so numerous." The offspring that he has not yet begun to have. And because he put his trust in Hashem, notice he put his trust in Hashem, he reckoned it to his merit. Then he said to him, "I am Hashem who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans, Ur Kasdim, to assign this land to you as a possession." And he said, meaning Abraham responds to Hashem, "After all these promises I have taken out of Ur Kasdim, I will give you many children. They will be countless as the stars. No, it won't be Ishmael, it will be Isaac. You can trust in me." Abraham asks, "Oh, Hashem God, how should I know that I'm to possess it? How am I going to know?" Abraham had previously said that he trusts God, right? We just saw he put his trust in God. Nonetheless, he questions. And what we want to focus on here is God's peculiar response. God said to Abraham, he said to Abraham, "Know well their offspring shall be strangers in a land not theirs, and they shall be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. Okay. Abraham questions, am I going to have children? Yes, you're going to have children. Are they going to inherit the land? Yes, they're going to inherit the land. How do I know that they will inherit the land? I will send them to be strangers in a land not theirs. They shall be enslaved and oppressed for 400 years. I don't understand. How is that proof whatsoever for Abraham's children receiving later the land? What does the process of going down to Egypt have to do with our becoming the nation that will later inherit the land of Israel? what's interesting is that we've seen before in the first commandment that we said is parallel to the first line of Shema, the first few words of Shema Yisrael. We don't just hear Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am your God, which we would expect the first commandment to end with. But we see who brought you out of the land of Egypt. I am Hashem your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. What does that have to do? Is that a commandment? I am your God. I'm your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. What does that have to do with anything? Is that a commandment? What is that? This going down to Egypt seems to be the essential proof that we will become a nation who not only will inherit the land of Israel, but we see here will also serve God. The servants of God is not just the service of God, but the service of God who took you out of the land of Egypt. Our primary identification point of what makes us servants of God. The primary aspect that proves to Abraham that we will later inherit the land. What does that have to do with anything? Going down to Egypt. Now, what I'd like to show, just to review, is that this going down to Egypt is reflective of a struggle with God that we'll later see with Jacob as the essential identity point of Yisrael, of Israel, of somebody who struggles with God. The Midrash Tanhuma, just to touch upon, says, what is the pasuk? The pasuk in Tehillim, your thoughts are very deep. Rabbi Yonatan said this alludes to the deep thoughts he shared with Abraham at the covenant between the pieces, when he said to him, know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger. These are the deep words. Oh, God, your thoughts are so deep. Your thoughts are so deep, God, that you told Abraham, how will you know that your children will inherit the land? I'll send them down to slavery in Egypt for 400 years. So deep, says Rabbi Yochanan. What's so deep about this? What is it about going down to Egypt into slavery, the struggle that we went through there that made us into a nation? So we're familiar, I'd imagine, with the numerous psukim in which we see that we are commanded to treat the stranger as ourselves, to love the stranger. Why? Because we were strangers in Egypt. Let's just look at a few. When strangers reside among you, do not wrong them. It should be as a citizen among you. The stranger who's among you. Love them as yourselves. Why? Because you were strangers in Egypt. I am your God. We see it again in Dvarim. Why should you love the stranger? For you were strangers in the land of Egypt. And again in Deuteronomy, bear in mind that you were slaves in the land of Egypt, and your God redeemed you. Therefore, continue this command this day. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt. That is what is going to support your work in loving the stranger. Okay, so we know that going down to Egypt was the essential ingredient to our becoming Israel, the people of who are to inherit the land. It is the essential ingredient that makes us serve God. Anochi Hashem Elokecha asher hotzeiticha me'eretz Mitzrayim. I'm your God who took you out of Egypt. And we know that what is so significant about going down to Egypt? That's what allows us to love the stranger. That's what teaches us to love the stranger. The learning of loving a stranger requires deep personal work. And I think the Malbim, as well as the Rav Yaakov Yosef of Ponoi, who was the primary student of the Besht, the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, who wrote almost entirely of the words of his teacher, the Baal Shem Tov, but not of himself, in one of his Hasidic works, the Toldot Yaakov Yosef, which we are going to read now, he cites his teacher 249 times. He says, I heard in the name of the he is the channel of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, into this world, into teaching. So the Malbim and the Baal Shem Tov both teach the same idea. So we're going to focus on the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov. Again, our question is, what role does going down to Egypt play in transforming us into a nation that's going to inherit the land of Israel, as it's God's primary promise to Abraham? Your children will inherit the land. How do you know? Because they're going to go into Egypt into slavery. When you serve God as Anochi Hashem Elokecha, this is your God who took you out of slavery in Egypt. You know that it's your God because you were slaves in Egypt. The slavery in Egypt, we know also, teaches us the essential behavior of loving the stranger. How does it do so? Well, the Baal Shem Tov teaches it is impossible to merit clinging to Hashem when the evil inclination and the evil inclination I'd like to understand here really not only as we typically may understand, as an inclination towards hurting others, or as an inclination towards eating lustfully, or as an inclination towards stealing. Rather, I think our evil inclination here is that which engenders a sense of separation and otherness, that in which I identify with my ego as other than and not as one. It is impossible to merit, we'll reread that with this understanding, it is impossible to merit clinging to Hashem when I'm focused on an identity of self that's other than. It's mine, it's not yours. I'm trying to get as much as possible. I want to have for me and not for you. These are what really inspire the stealing, the lust, whatever it is. So it's separating, I apologize. When the evil inclination is separating, it is impossible to merit clinging to Hashem. And if so, Abraham asks, how will I know? With the evil inclination so strong, the Baal Shem Tov is understanding that Abraham is asking, how is it possible that my descendants are going to inherit the land of Israel, are going to be your people, are going to be clinging to you to be able to merit to come into your land? And to this, Hashem responded, know that your descendants will be strangers. That's how they're going to overcome this evil inclination. And through the challenges and suffering that they will face there as strangers, they will achieve clinging. In which case, God's statement here is not a decree that you are going to be strangers in a land far away, but a good tiding. This is a promise. I'm promising you that your children will be slaves. Why is that a good tiding? Because that is what's going to clean them from the sense of separateness, from the sense of evil that's going to result in allowing them to cling to God, to truly cling to God. This reminds us, I think, and the Malbim says the same thing, of what we saw just 2 weeks ago. As we saw, Rav Nassim writes about the Kriyat Shema, that this is the aspect of when I sit in darkness, Hashem is my light. We were speaking about reading the Shema prior to going to sleep, and sleep as the aspect of letting go my expectations, letting go my narrative of the world. Specifically, when I sit in darkness, which is the aspect of as light is superior to darkness, specifically from the darkness, that's where I can see and connect to God. For particularly at the moment when the darkness and judgments and the seeming punishments, God forbid, prevail, both in our service of God and material matters, specifically then, the primary recommendation is to close one's eyes and to nullify oneself to the purpose which is all. And through doing so, all of the seeming punishments and challenges are nullified too. So we saw 2 weeks ago, Rav Nassim is speaking about the importance of nullification, of letting go of my narratives, letting go of my attachments, letting go of my expectations. And in doing so, I'm able to close my eyes and realize God's oneness in all. This is what allows us to accept the stranger. This is what allows us to see the stranger not as a stranger, but as a part of the oneness, even though that stranger is different. Once I've let go of my expectations and inclinations, my sense of self as other, needing to protect and define my ego, this cleansing that we go through in Egypt actually is what allows us to love the stranger and ultimately to recognize God, to recognize the oneness of all. It's easy potentially, or actually extremely difficult, to sit through a class that says experience God in all and to bring that into my life. That process is extraordinarily challenging to manifest that teaching in my life. But God is telling Abraham, don't worry, your children will be able to manifest this. How so? Because they will go through Egypt. They will go into a strange land. They will be strangers. In being strangers, they will have to let go of their expectations and their narratives of I'm strong, I'm better than, I've got all the answers, I know. And in doing so, they will open up to loving the stranger, which will be the primary expression of their serving me, the God who is one, who fills all. This is the aspect of Israel, who struggles with God. We see in a beautiful quote from Elie Wiesel, and we're going to stop for questions and discussion right after this, that Elie Wiesel writes about the messengers of God, speaking about Jacob's fight with the angel. He writes so beautifully, Jacob has just understood through this struggle, through this wrestling with God, wrestling with Elohim, the aspect of boundary, distinction, otherness, wrestling with and struggling with it, going down to the depths of slavery in Egypt, of struggle, of pain, of tragedy. By going down in there and struggling with God in these places, Jacob has just understood a fundamental truth. God is in man, even in suffering, even in misfortune, even in evil. God is everywhere, in every being. God does not wait for man at the end of the road, the termination of exile. He accompanies him there. God accompanied us in exile. More than that, he is the road. He is the exile. God holds both ends of the rope. He is present in every extremity. He is every limit. He is part of Jacob as he is part of Esau. This wrestling, whether it's Jacob's angel, Jacob's other side, or it's God and the aspects of God that are limitation, or it's the angel of Esau, all opinions that we see in the sources, they all mean the same thing. It's struggling with this world of difference, of distinction, of parts of me that I like and parts of me that I don't like, parts of me that I accept and parts of me that I don't accept, competition, ego, struggling and wrestling with these things in order to come to a place of understanding that God is truly in all. God is truly one. With that, we'll pause for some questions, and then maybe we'll have an opportunity to speak in Chavruta if it seems like a good time. Yeah, Mom.
Well, so what I'm having trouble with is that this sounds very universalistic. It sounds like it should be Shema everybody. Mm-hmm. Why there's a chosenness aspect to the Shema Yisrael, and we also are always, every day, every part of our tefillah, always thanking God for taking us out of Mitzrayim. So it seems like a lesson for Israel to be open, for Yisrael that we should struggle and therefore not separate ourselves from other people and concern ourselves with everyone. But why are we given that directive and not all of humanity?
Beautiful. Can I have you ask the same question at the end of the question period? Because it's the perfect transition into the next piece, which is exactly struggling with that. I'll just share the title, which is, but are we not the people of difference? Meaning, you're telling me on the one hand, I'm saying on the one hand that, as Elie Wiesel writes very beautifully, this universalistic proclamation of the oneness of all, in which case all should be calling, not Israel in particular, but everyone should be calling upon, in this instruction of calling upon God's name, and the oneness of God should be a call for and to all. And on the other hand, the unique difference of Israel is what stands out, that we are different people, we are other. And it's a huge question, it's a perfect question. I'm excited to go there. Right. Yeah, Noah.
I thought that was very exciting. I really liked that whole section. There were two specific things that it brought up for me that I was thinking of. One is just also thinking, and I'm not great with like the kind of timeline of where Abraham is in his life at this point, but he's generally like a very successful person. And I can imagine it like makes me think about, well, I guess movies, but I'm sure it exists in real life too, of like wealthy parents who have everything and they're like really set up and they're like, oh no, how are my kids gonna like learn to be good people like I am if they're given everything? So God's like, oh, don't worry, they'll also suffer.
They'll be thrown out of the castle. Right.
So just kind of like that parallel, I guess. But the more exciting, interesting thing for me is that up until now, the Shema has felt very personal. And this really highlights for me a kind of ongoing theme within kind of biblical Judaism that I think is important, which is that like, it's really not about you and me as individuals, it's really about the people. And the fact that like, trying to think like, how is it okay for God to have all of those individuals go down to Egypt and suffer, but because the goal is to create not individuals who will then be good people, but like an entire nation that will then be able to take up this role of caring for the strangers, which again is then important to like creating a good world and isn't just about I don't know, kind of thinking beyond the individual and about the nation impact.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That a nation whose role it is to be delving into these struggles, into these challenges, and in doing so, finding a love for the stranger and sort of raising that banner, that flag of struggle with those things that separate us in order to find the unity within.
And I think like, as we see, and the fact that we continue to reference that, having not experienced Egypt, that's still the thing that we point to be, this is why you should be good people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Awesome. Tiferet.
Thank you. I'll just say I was really enjoying that baby. But I'm trying to put together what seems to be, to me, at least in the surface, two different concepts in the tradition. So Jacob wrestling, that's his own individual struggle with Hashem and looking for a blessing. And then trying to link that into our struggle in Egypt, which is a collective struggle. It feels like stretching a long bow to link these two things. And I'm sure everything is connected, but right now in this moment, it seems like a bit of a cognitive gymnastics, actually. And yeah, learning empathy as a people from our own struggling. I'm not sure that that's the same thing as a personal wrestling asking for my personal blessing. I hope my questions make some sort of sense.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Can you say that last line one more time? Because I really loved it.
I don't think I can.
This class is recorded. We can go back.
That's right. That's right.
What did you hear me say? And maybe I can.
And the finding empathy as a people through our struggles.
Yes.
Yeah.
And how does that connect with our own individual struggle? I thought maybe we were going to go, looking at Elohim and living with severe boundaries around us that we couldn't move. I was going to the place of, okay, after we've been so constricted, when we expand, maybe we know better, or hopefully we've learned better where the safe limits are, not the oppressive limits, but the safe and reasonable and just limits. So I'm having a number of different thoughts and trying to connect them in a coherent stream.
Beautiful. I mean, I'll just say like a few things that are coming up for me. What I think it's essential question of connecting the process of a people to the personal process, and like the Rambam says, when we sit at the Seder during Passover, that every one of us is supposed to matchil b'shevach, that we each need to see ourselves as going through the process of leaving Egypt and beginning with that narrow place and then expanding outward. And I think absolutely that expanding outward is an expanding outward into healthy boundary, not into boundaryless expanse of infinity, but into healthy boundary, which is the process that we go through of leaving the bounds of Egypt and coming into the bounds of God's boundaries, of receiving the Torah at Sinai and receiving the healthy boundary that supports my personal growth instead of tries to suppress me. So I think that's absolutely an essential process and bridge to gap. One thing that, just because I think like this conversation is sort of nicely flowing, so I don't know that we'll have a chance to see the rest of the sources. So I just want to show one source that touches upon both what you and my mom also spoke about, of the connection between the process of our people and the process of the universe, which relates to this parallel. And I'll just look at another piece from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who talks a lot about the importance of difference as the Jewish people's role that they're playing within this world. And I think it relates to how we take it to our own lives. The test of faith is whether I can make space for difference. If we really believe in unity, if we really believe in the union of God, that God is one and that God fills all, then it means that God fills the opposite of me. He who opposes me, who has the oppositional position and opinion as me, who looks totally different than me. If we truly believe in God's oneness, can I recognize God's image in someone who is not in my image, whose language, faith, ideal are different from mine? If I cannot, then I have made God in my image instead of allowing him to remake me in his. Such powerful words. And he continues, and we'll take this part and then I'll touch upon your question. Judaism's great contribution to humanity, and this touches upon what my mom was saying. Judaism's great contribution to humanity has been to show that one can be other and still human. still a loyal and active citizen, still make contributions to every field of human endeavor, still be loved by God and held precious in his sight. The root cause of anti-Semitism, oh my gosh, I apologize. I'm not going to read this because I didn't edit it. I apologize. In any case.
Nadav, can I jump in for a sec?
Yeah. I'll just finish the thought, Daniel, which is just that this idea of dignity of difference, Tiferet, is that not only as a people are we bold enough and courageous enough to be our people, which demands from the others around us, the other people around us, to accept not only us, but accept difference, accept the dignity of difference, of otherness. So it is universal in its particularism. In being particular, I'm actually making the boldest, most courageous and radical universal move of demanding that we have a universalism that accepts difference, accepts otherness. And I think just for your point, Tiferet, that in my own life is the same request, invitation, and demand to be my own true self, to be who I am. Not only Yisrael as a people, but Yisrael as Nadav, Yisrael as Tiferet. Be you, serve God in my way, in your own way. And in doing so, we're actually building the oneness of God in the world, demanding the acceptance of difference, the acceptance of the truth that divinity fills all. Okay, sorry, I wanted, Daniel, please.
So today's class is focusing on the name Yisrael and what it's doing in the Shema. And you're also tying the name Yisrael to what Jacob's process of transformation was, that somehow is a parallel to the nation in Egypt and how we got out of Egypt, and that we could love the stranger, and that what that experience in Egypt and Mitzrayim taught us. And I think there's a very simple, basic connection, and it's really beautiful for me to look at the connection between Jacob's transformation and what happened in Egypt. And it's very simple, which is that Jacob lied to his father about his name.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
In that, talk about family trauma. One of the most shameful things a person can do is lie about who they are.
Mm-hmm.
This was a very shameful moment for Jacob, where his father asks him, what is your name? And he says, I am Esau. And the estrangement, Jacob becomes a stranger to his brother, but Jacob is also estranged from his own inner self, his own true self. He goes into exile for 20 years. He's like the first person going to Mitzrayim. He hangs out with Laban, which is a Mitzrayim of its own. And when he finally gets the call to go back and follow his mission, he has to confront Esau. Mm-hmm. And in that dark night where he's wrestling with this mysterious being, we don't know who it is, but what if the Ish was really Hashem or Elohim within Jacob? And the turning point in that encounter is when the Ish says, what is your name? And Jacob answers truthfully, my name is Jacob. And that's when he speaks his truth. And that's when he regains his own integrity and has an experience of the Ish as being a kind of loving presence that can support him in being his true self. And we know that Yisrael, if you look at it with a different pronunciation of the vowels, is Yasher El. Yasher, which means true, and El, your true divine self. That's why when it's over, he's able to say, I have seen El, the divine, face to face, and it's inside of me. And so when he greets his estranged brother, a stranger, he's able to say to his brother, seeing you, Esau, is like seeing the face of the divine. It's one of the most gorgeous moments of reconciliation in Torah. And so we have an experience of brothers who've been estranged, loving each other. They've reconciled. And so it becomes kind of a individual family paradigm for the more collective paradigm of what happens in Egypt, where what liberates us, what begins the process of liberation, is the divine being a compassionate listener that says, I hear your cry. I hear the suffering. I hear the suffering. I hear your cries. You know that whole scene? Right. That becomes the power that loves us, that can be with us in exile. So when we can connect with that source of compassion that Hashem is, that is what liberates those places in us, in our personal Egypt, where we're ashamed, where we're stuck in the past. And so Jacob becomes a paradigm for transformation. And the Shema, when we recite it, is also a transformative process. So we need Yisrael in there to come back to our true self, to become more reconciled with our own inner wholeness and the parts of us that need loving kindness. So I think it's a beautiful question. I know I just took a long time here, but I think it's just a beautiful question.
We should have given you way more time. You should have been partially your. Beautiful. Really, really appreciate that. Seeing the transformation that Israel goes through in Egypt in reclaiming, in a sense, our name, as parallel to the process that Jacob's going through, having denied and lied about his name shamefully, coming into true acceptance of who he is, and who he is, not necessarily as opposed to who Esav is, but who he is in a puzzle piece, a part of which Esav is also, that he's struggling with Esav. Who are you? Who am I? Who is really embracing of himself. So beautiful. That was, yeah, I hope I understood it fully. So there's so much depth there. Mitchell, please.
Sure. So I kind of got lost in the argument about 40 minutes ago. And I want to try and back up to something really basic because I think I missed something. Abraham says to God, how will I know, that I will get the land? And God says, because I will send you, to Egypt and you will become slaves. And you'll be strangers. How does that answer the question? I don't see I understand the power of the collective experience of slavery, and I see the transformation, the potential of transformation. I still don't see how we answer the question, how that answers the question, how do I know that I'll get the land? I mean, yes, we'll have a collective experience. Yes, that collective experience will define us. Yes, that collective experience, because we know that you, God, were part of it, will engender our service to you. But where does the land come? Like where is the answer to Abraham's question? I missed something. So
Yeah. It's I think you are clarifying that the question was not truly answered, and I think your question is spot on in helping us to actually fully answer the question, which I'm not necessarily, which I'm proposing a response to, which is an assumed piece of this puzzle that I didn't spell out, was that inheriting the land is really inheriting of the name, is the inheriting of truly becoming God's people. That this is the land that's given to the people who are God's, who are able to fully align with and channel God in this world. And that ability or that role is something that is built through the process of going down to Egypt, which is the process parallel to the process that Jacob goes through in struggling with the angel, which is really engaging with the challenges that God gives us in this world and wrestling with Elohim, the boundaries, the specificity as as Daniel's been speaking about the specificity of my name. Wait, but why do I have to be just my name? Why can't I fulfill all of the dreams and imaginations that I want? I also want to be tall, and I also want to live here, and I also want to have this aspect of me. I want to be everything. But the strictures of Mitzarim, strictures of you are enslaved to a particular role here, you're going to do this, going through that struggle and needing to wrestle with that lot that we're given by God, the lot that we're given by God, the specificity of the lot that I'm given by God, represented by Egypt, represented by Jacob's struggle with the angel, with Elohim, is what allows us and breeds us into being God's people, who therefore will be able to inherit the land. Because God, we're trying to propose, fills all. The key of God is God fills all, and fills all even as, no matter how different it is, that the specificity of you're different and you're different and you're different, and this looks bad and this looks like it's not wanted and this looks like it's against what you value, whatever it is, that too is part of God. That's what it means to be God's people, is to be able to see God within everything, which is the struggle that we had to go through in Egypt, going through a slavery there. I just want to invite yeah.
Sorry, just so in essence, Abraham's question is, it's both rhetorical and a metaphor. So it's not just the land, but it also relates to, and you will be a great people. So in asking about the land, he's essentially saying, well, wait, how are we going to be a great people? And so then the response is the response of slavery and the particular experience. Is that it?
Yeah, I mean, I think an aligned people, great people in so much as we are truly accepting who we are, which is the challenge that we have to go through in Egypt.
Okay.
Abby's had her hand for a little while, and then I see that Rachel wants to say something, and then we'll, I know that Noah's had his hand, but he already shared, so then we'll move to a closing practice.
Yeah, there's been a lot of beautiful water under the bridge, but I'm going to be brave and try and come back to what I was going to say. What a beautiful discussion, though. I really want to say that. For me, when I'm listening and learning here, I have to experience what we're studying at a lot of different levels at once. There's the drash, that we're all talking about, and but there's also this coming back to over and over again of this experience of, even at the very beginning, of meeting Din, of meeting Elohim, of wrestling with the angel, and by that we learn our name, which Daniel so beautifully brought forward. And when Abraham asks, how do I know that I'm going to have this great people that inherit the name, that inherit the land? He's given this beautiful answer of, I'm going to send him to Egypt. And Abraham has just come out of, Jacob has just come out of his own experience of wrestling with Egypt, wrestling with Din, wrestling with how to be one with God and how to be different with God at the same time. So he's reassured that that the same face-to-face will be given to his ancestors when they go into the land of Yisrael, because they will be going back and doing the same experience of wrestling, of going to Egypt. Like, a lot happens in Egypt. you know, it's like being a psychotherapist. You cannot be one with yourself or with God until you've gone in and wrestled with all of Egypt, until you've taken it apart and understood it, untangled it, and seen the blessing. And then you're face to face with God, with yourself. So I just love the whole lesson, because it just keeps coming back to that initial piece of how do we come face to face with Holy Oneness?
Yeah, and I think that one of the challenges of sharing this, and I was going to say explaining this, but explaining would imply that I understand it. But it's really, it's what is Egypt to us, and what is Egypt for each one of us, and facing the particular challenges of our life, the particularity of our situation, of what it means to be me, what it means to be the people Israel, what that means in the role that I play as part of my family, in my relationships, the role that we play among the world. There are so many layers of it. And this is a process that clearly we're going through. We're continuing to go through, trying to face our Egypt, trying to stand face to face with Hashem. If we had already gone through it, then we would be in the end of days, but we're just going through this process. So I really appreciate the the layers that you brought in, Abby. Thank you. Yeah, Rachel, you wanted to share something?
Yeah, I'll try to be quick. I think it's really interesting that we're studying this in the month of Adar, because Purim is all about opposites and the union of opposites.
Mm-hmm.
And you're even supposed to dress up as your opposite, and it's merriment and fun. And I think it's supposed to be very playful in that sense. And it leads into Passover. So before you go to Passover, you're studying another Exodus story, but this time it's Esther and Haman and Ahasuerus and whatnot. And the whole process is one of kind of playful experimentation with the idea of opposites. So I just think it ties in so well with what you're talking about.
Beautiful. It is, Rachel, it's really important to bring in that there's this element of joy in it. It's actually so fun. One of the, in my understanding, one of the key elements of humor is that it's surprising. Humor is basically surprises and just not expecting what's going to come, and letting go of that expectation, that bitul, letting go of our expectations of our stories, which requires a certain sense of Mitzrayim, of being stuck in a certain place. Your head's down and something pops out from you on the side that you're in this, and then you're able to be surprised, and you're able to roll out the laughter. Noah, we have 1 minute until 15. 15, we'll start the practice. You have 1 minute to share.
I had just been thinking about what Daniel was saying about names and identities and that type of thing. I just think about another aspect of like what slavery in Mitzrayim meant, in addition to boundaries, is a loss of identity. And I think that was an important aspect of leaving Egypt, was like we were, when you're an enslaved people, your like cultural identity is being forcibly removed from you. And I think that's like a big challenge with slavery that's far greater than the fact that you have to work for not money. And
right.
Yeah, so that kind of parallel to when we left Egypt and kind of getting our name and identity.
The now identity is something that you need to choose, you need to protect. It's not just something that's taken for granted, but it's something that you now need to really own. Okay, it's already 7:15. So first of all, thank you for anybody who has to leave. And if you're still with us, then we will move into our closing practice. Okay. You can find a comfortable seat. You can bring your legs to a comfortable position. Your back straight up. And we're going to do some movement in our bodies. So while hopefully you'll get the movement and be able to close your eyes, you can start off by looking and joining me. And part of this practice is to embrace our boundaries, to embrace our strictures, the limited but divine aspect of who we are, what our bodies are, where my body ends. So we'll do some movement with our hands. Begin by bringing our hands down towards our lap. Slowly, and then raising it back up to our chest. So you can see. And back down towards our lap. And up to our chest. Breathing out as we move our hands forward and downward. And then forward up. Continuing the out breath. And on the in breath, we turn our hands towards our chest and slowly bring our hands in. As we're doing so, we're just trying to notice our boundaries, notice where our body ends, feeling it, embracing it. On the out breath, we move our hands to the side. And on the in breath, we bring our hands to in between our eyes, and we'll just hold them there for a second. Trying to really move our hands slowly, feeling each little move. When we pass by our face, notice our face. And in the out breath, we bring our hands all the way around. Bring our hands back to our chest. And we begin from the start, from our chest to our thighs. Back up to our chest on the in-breath. Forward on the out-breath, down and up. In-breath towards our chest. On the out-breath, we push to the side. In-breath, holding our hands in between our eyes once we arrive. And on the out-breath, we can think about the bigness in our being small. Out-breath, reaching around, so small but so big. Our bigness is in our smallness. Our greatness is in our embrace of our limitation. Back to our chest. And we'll do one more down to our thighs. Back up to our chest. Out breath, forward, down, and up. In breath to our chest. Out breath to the side. In breath to in between the eyes. All the time, embracing our smallness. Our greatness is in our smallness, our embrace of ourselves, and out breath all the way around. So we come to our resting in front of our chest, holding our heart. Take a few in-breaths through our nose, out through our mouth. Taking a moment to remind yourself of your name. Remind yourself of our name, Yisrael. Allowing ourselves to face those challenging parts of ourselves, those challenging parts of our people, our limitation, our specificity. Knowing that only in doing so, not just through blind acceptance, but through struggle, through wrestling, in doing so, we'll be able to truly love the other. Stand face to face with Hashem. Thank you so much. A wonderful week. It's great to see you. Looking forward to our final week next week. Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. So excited to conclude this process with you.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks.
Great class. Thanks, Nadav. I'm learning a ton.
Thank you so much. Rachel.
Along, bye.
Have a great week.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. See you soon.
Nadav, just wait a second.
Okay.